Share my screen here. Okay, I see some people are popping into the webinar here. Welcome. This is the 2023 GRADflix training session for the 2023 GRADflix competition. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to make just another minute or so to let people trickle in so that we don't get started before everyone's arrived in the session. A few quick notes before we begin. The session will be recorded. In fact, it is recording now. And chat is disabled for this event. If you have questions at any given point, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. If they can be answered quickly, one of us might have a chance to respond via text response. Otherwise, we'll flag them and we'll try to address everything in the live Q&A at the end of the session. The session recording will be available following the session on the GSPA website. And if you want to follow along during the session, I am posting in the chat now a link to a OneDrive folder. And this will have a PDF version of the slides that we're going to be going through today in case you want to sort of follow them as we're speaking. Okay, so I think we will go ahead and get started just with the basic introductions, and then hopefully people will join us or continue to join us as we go on. My name is Graham Northcote. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the Graduate and Postdoctoral Programming Specialist here at GSPA, or Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. I'll be kicking things off before I turn it over to our other speakers for today. So just before we begin, I'd like to start with a brief territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, which is land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within our Office of Indigenous Relations. If you are interested in learning more, I encourage you to check out their page there. Public acknowledgement of the traditional territory upon which we all live is an important first step towards reconciliation, although it is important to recognize that this is only the first step. All right. So again, a quick couple of notes of participation. It will be recorded. The slides will be found in the OneDrive folder using the link below, and questions will be answered through the Zoom Q&A. It's so important to note that questions will not appear in the video recording. An anonymized transcript of the Zoom Q&A will be made available following the session upon request. Okay. So the speakers for today are myself, Graham Northcote, as I mentioned, as well as Sarah Howard, she, her, Manager, Postdoctoral Affairs and Programming Development at the Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs Office. Then we'll be hearing from Eugenia Dadsey, who's the 2022 GRADflix winner, as well as a master's student in the Department of Biology here at the University of Waterloo. Then we'll be turning things over to Elise Vist, from the who is the Multimodal and Public Scholarship Program Developer at the Writing and Communication Center. And then finally, we'll be hearing from Lauren Bile, who is the Copyright and Licensing Librarian, Collection Development at the library, and she'll be going over some copyright considerations. So the agenda, Sarah will be kicking things off with an introduction to the competition, what is GRADflix and why you might want to participate. Eugenia will also be speaking as part of this section. Then I will be discussing how to create your 60-second video. And then Elise will be going over how to communicate your research to a general audience effectively. And finally, Lauren will be going over copyright considerations, as I mentioned, and then we'll be finishing with a live Q&A panel where we can all answer any questions that you have about any of the topics that came up during the presentation thus far. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah Howard, and hopefully you enjoy her portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Graham. I'll just wait. I think I'm going to share my own slides. Yes, perfect. All right, so I'll get my sharing going. Okay, are you able to see that okay? Perfect, thank you. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm excited to provide you with some information about our GRADflix competition. So this is our 5th year of the competition. It was started in 2018 here at the University of Waterloo. So the competition actually was developed and started here. We're really excited that it's actually been adopted now by several other universities across Ontario. So It's really great to see the traction that we've had. We're having more and more students participate every year, and it's great to see it gaining ground. So what exactly is GRADflix? If you haven't seen our showcase before, GRADflix is a research communication opportunity for graduate students where you create a 1-minute video that describes your research. And if you're in this training session, you're probably here because you want more information on how exactly you do that. I know it can sound a little bit overwhelming to create a video, so you'll get lots of tips and tricks as we go through the session about how you can do that. Videos can take many different forms. Again, you'll hear more about that in the session, but the criteria is that to be counted as a video, it has to include 2 things, the first being movement and the second being sound, but there's lots of options within that. So as I mentioned, this is a competition for our graduate students. So to be eligible to participate in GRADflix here at the University of Waterloo, you do need to be a grad student currently registered in a master's research, so that's thesis or MRP program, or in a PhD program at the time of the competition. So if you have a degree completed but not yet convocated, you're still eligible to participate. So we do have sometimes questions from students who maybe defend their thesis in December, competition that we'll go over the dates, but the showcase isn't until January. So they sometimes wonder if they're still able to participate. And the answer is yes. As long as you haven't convocated, you are eligible to participate. And next convocation isn't until June. So if you're a student here today, then that means you will be eligible for this competition season. For participating, in addition to your video, you do also have to be willing to allow that video to be made public and provide a photo and a short bio. This is to facilitate our showcase event. By submitting your video, you also are saying that you agree that that submission is an original work that you've created and you have all the necessary rights. As Gray mentioned, we have a presentation on copyright later on that will give you a lot of details to make sure you're comfortable with making sure you have all the necessary rights for your submission. So as I mentioned, students who are degree complete but haven't convocated yet are eligible to participate. I think it's also really important to let you know that no matter what stage of your research you're at, you're eligible to participate. And not only are you eligible, but you have just as good of a chance of winning one of our prizes, regardless of where you're at the competition. So whether you're just submitting your proposal this term, maybe you're gathering data, maybe you're writing your thesis, no matter where you're at, you have enough information to create a really good 1-minute video about your research. As an example, 2 years ago, I remember one of our winners, when I was talking to him after, he told me he actually created his GRADflix video because he wanted a short video that he could share with people when he was inviting them to participate in his research, because he wanted people to interview. So he hadn't even gotten to the step where he was doing his research. He didn't have people to interview. He had just finished his proposal and he was still one of our winners. We also sometimes get questions about if people need experience to participate, and the answer is no. You don't need any technical expertise, no video editing experience, no public speaking practice. Everyone is eligible to participate, and throughout this session, you'll get lots of really helpful information so that you can be successful regardless of your level of experience. And part of the reason that that kind of technical experience specifically isn't required is because of how we've laid out our judging criteria. So the judges for our competition judge our videos on 3 categories. Communication is worth the most, because that's what the competition is really about. It's about sharing your research, disseminating that knowledge. So it's worth 50%. Creativity, so being creative and thoughtful in the way you present your research, is worth 30%. And then that technical quality at the end is only worth 20%. So even if you don't have the greatest technical video, you can still score really well. And the other way around as well, just because one of your colleagues has wonderful technical video creation skills, that doesn't necessarily give them a leg up. They still need to be able to do that communication part, as that is the largest part of the criteria. So I'll go over important dates really quick. These are also available on our website, but you're at our training session here today, October 27th. So you'll get some support today. There is lots of other support available to you though, as we kind of lead into the submission deadline. So we have 2 drop-in sessions where you can get support on your video in November and December. November 22nd is the official deadline to register. That's to make sure we can provide you with all the important information leading up to that submission deadline in early January. And then we end with our showcase on January 31st. So I'm not going to go over these submission details too much. I know that submission deadline is still quite a ways away, and you'll probably forget some of this by now, so it is already on our website. But the key point here is that your video just has to be sent to us in an MP4 format. And then in addition to that, as I mentioned, you have to submit a photo and bio. So that's part of the submission details. You have to do that in addition to sending the video. And then once all the videos are submitted to us, we have a panel of judges who select our finalists, whose videos are streamed live on YouTube for our virtual showcase event. We have a live People's Choice vote at that event and an announcement of our winners. So this is probably an exciting part of the competition for most of you, is the announcement of the prizes. We do give out a first, second, third, and fourth place prize, ranging in value from $250 to $750. These prizes are based on those judging criteria that I've told you about. We also have 2 additional prizes that are available. The People's Choice Prize. So like I mentioned, we have that live People's Choice vote where all of the attendees, the people watching, can vote for their People's Choice based on whatever criteria they want to choose. And then new this year, I'm really happy to announce we have a brand new prize for most compelling social impact story. So this prize is not based on the original judging criteria, and whether or not your research has that social impact story, it doesn't impact your ability to get any of those first to fourth place prizes. So this prize is judged based on how your research has potential to make a difference in the well-being of people and or the planet. Specifically, how urgent is the problem and how big is it? This prize is sponsored by Greenhouse, which is a social impact incubator at United College that offers programs, opportunities, and a community for students to develop problem-solving skills, form innovative ideas, and make new forms of sustainable impact around social or environmental change. So I'm really excited, as I said, that we have that additional prize to give out this year. So in addition to the virtual showcase, this year we're bringing back an in-person component to our showcase event, which we're really excited about. Our finalists will all be invited to an in-person viewing party. So I really encourage you, if you're participating, to save the date January 31st, not just so you can watch, but so that if you're a finalist, you can join us on campus to view all the videos together with the rest of the finalists. So we've gone over all the details, but I think some of you might still be wondering, but why participate? So there are lots of benefits of participating in GRADflix. First, you get to develop and broaden your research communication skills. We all know how important it is to be able to share what you're doing with other people. You also get to learn a new skill that you might not have practiced before, which is that video production and editing. At the end, you'll have this video as well to be able to share with others. So it's a great thing that you can share online through different platforms in a really condensed and easy to understand way, which can help you expand your network and gain more exposure. And then also we do have those 6 prizes that you have the opportunity to win. But I don't want you to just take our word for it. We have our winner of the 2022 GRADflix competition here with us. Eugenia is going to be able to share a little bit of her experience next and the value of participating from her experience. I will also note that we have some interviews with other past winners on our website if you want to hear from other winners as well. But I will stop sharing my screen now then and turn it over to Eugenia to talk about her experience.
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Eugenia, and I'm currently a second-year master's student. I participated in the GRADflix competition last year when I was new to my master's, and like I said, I had just joined. My master's, like, that transition was already very challenging, but I was looking for even more of a challenge. And I came across the GRADflix competition. It was something I didn't know about. I did my undergraduate studies here, but I wasn't in the graduate program, so I didn't receive any of the emails. But I happened to receive the GRADflix email. So that's how I learned about that competition. I read about it. I'm like, that's very interesting, because it was something that it was going to be like an outlet for my creative side. And I felt it was an opportunity for me to, like you mentioned, learn how to concisely explain my research, because that's something that I struggle with, and it was a good opportunity for me to practice. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to participate in the GRADflix competition. So I think the experience overall, it was a very good experience. When I started, I had no idea what to do, but I attended the training session, the GRADflix training session, and I learned about the different ways that I can make a video to describe my research, like the stop motion and the other types of videos. But I chose to do what I did, the way that I presented my video, which is like an animation where I drew everything by hand, just because I felt it best suited my project, the nature of my project. So I'm a microbiology grad student, and my research focuses on finding microorganisms that can break down synthetic plastics and then use that as a form of plastic remediation. But it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's generally the general subject area. And I felt like having more control over how I visually or graphically represented or portrayed my project was going to be, I prefer to have more control, I should say, because it was better suited for my project. Like, for instance, and I don't know if you've watched the video, but I had a section where I had to represent microorganisms breaking down plastic pieces. I didn't know how to do that with like stop motion, for instance. So I felt if I could draw it by hand, it's going to be better, but then I can personalize it. So I think overall it was a good experience. It was challenging a little bit because, like I said, I didn't know how to start. But one thing that helped me was reaching out to previous winners. So I reached out to, I believe, the 2019 winner and the 2020 winner, and they kind of pointed me in the right direction. I really liked how they did their videos, and I knew they must have drawn the frames by hand, and then somehow put it together. I didn't have a background in animation, but that's always something that I was curious about, like how are cartoons made. So they pointed me in the right direction, and I gathered some tools, a bunch of options that I could use, and then I went from there. Sorry, 1 second. I'm looking at my notes. So yeah, and one thing that I got out of the GRADflix experience, I think the most obvious one is being able to explain my research to a non-specialist audience. Before I did GRADflix, I think my friends and family, they have no idea what my research was about. My parents, for the longest time, even my sister, and she has a background in science, although it's engineering, but my parents don't have a background in science. It's arts, and it's arts. So they didn't quite understand my project. And every time I explained, I would add way too many details that they did not need. So they were just confused. They just knew, okay, Eugenia's in microbiology. that's it. But after I made that video, they were like, so that's what you're doing. So I think, yeah, that was really good for me. And till date, like I have the link to the video on my LinkedIn and my resume. So if anyone is curious as to what I'm doing, they can just go there and get a general gist of what my project is about. So yeah, one of the main things that I got out of it was being able to explain my research to a non-specialist audience, and also how to make animations. I have really grown to like making animations, and whenever I have to do a presentation and I want to depict something in a graphical format, I just make a very short GIF, like a cartoon, to do that. And I was able to learn how to do that because I chose to participate in GRADflix, which was the catalyst that made me investigate how to make animations in the first place. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a push for me to do that. An advice that I have for people interested in participating in GRADflix is definitely to take advantage of all the resources that are available, like the training session and the resources that are being provided by the organizers of GRADflix. It was very helpful to me. That was my starting point, at least, because I learned the different kinds of videos that people normally make and the options that are available to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known where to start. And so once I identified what kind of video amongst the list that were offered, what kind of video best suited my project, then I reached out to previous winners who had done something similar to find out what kinds of tools they used, and then did more research on those tools, and then picked the ones that I wanted to use. So yeah, definitely take advantage of the help being offered, and ask, people that have done it previously. If you have any questions, yeah, you can feel free to email me. I can drop my email address in the chat function. But also one thing, advice that I have regarding the video creation itself is simplicity is key. You don't want too many details, or else you will lose your audience, and your audience are people that have no background in your field, or at least that's what the judges will be. They won't know, they won't have any background in what you're studying. So make it as simple as possible. And one thing I did was, when I was drafting my script for my videos, once the video was made, I had to draft a script so that I can follow it and record the narration. So I drafted that, and then I asked a couple of my friends that are in arts, in engineering. Again, beforehand, they had no idea what my project was about, but I went through that process with them. I'd read it to them or record it, send it to them, be like, does this make sense to you? Do you understand? And then they'll be like, you lost me over here. I think, this piece of information is not so critical in my understanding of your project. You can take it out. So definitely take advantage of, that doesn't sound right. Definitely ask people in your life that don't have a background in your field. I think they'll be able to help you pinpoint the pillars of your project that you need to include for someone that's not experienced in your project to understand what you're doing. And finally, enjoy the process. I found the process extremely enjoyable. There was a lot of sitting, a lot of drawing, because making animations, I found out, is actually not that easy. A lot of work goes into it. I sat down for hours and hours just drawing, but although the sitting down was tedious, the opportunity to have a creative outlet was good. I was able to play around with colors and shapes and drawings and put things together, see how it looks, and I found it very enjoyable. So however you choose to present your video, just have fun with the process and be creative. Yep, that's all I have to say. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Eugenia. That was fantastic. A lot of really great advice there for other participants, some of which actually we're going to be touching on a little bit more throughout the rest of the training session as well. So definitely I urge everyone here to keep those pieces of advice in mind, and I hope you find that sort of motivating if you're still sort of on the fence considering whether to participate in GRADflix or not. And Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, Eugenia, and congratulations again on your victory last year. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again now, and we're going to get into a bit of the elements that Eugenia already mentioned, actually, the sort of tips for creating your 60-second video. So in this section, we're going to discuss just some elements of the different types of videos that are sort of out there that you could model your video after, as well as some basic tools, software and resources that you can use to help get started, and just some tips as well. None of this is meant to be an in-depth guide for how to do that. We're not sort of necessarily experts in video creation ourselves, but there are general tips that will help you succeed and just give you a very good launching point for your research video. So I'd like to just, before we dive into how you can create your own video, I think it's important to be clear on what the requirements are for the GRADflix competition. So these are the requirements that are posted on our website. Make sure you review these carefully before you start planning out your video. You don't want to sort of get partway through creating your video and then realize that it doesn't quite meet the requirements for GRADflix. So as Sarah mentioned earlier, your video must include movement, which can be slide transitions, zoom in, zoom outs, or a subject moving on video. And it also has to include sound, which could be voiceover, like narration. It could be various sound effects or music that are involved in it as well. Your video can be less than 60 seconds, but it cannot be longer than 60 seconds. And this means that the actual timestamp on the video cannot be longer than 1 minute. Even if you're not talking for the full thing, make sure that the video file itself is only 60 seconds in length. Your video also has to focus on research conducted for your thesis, MRP, or dissertation in your current graduate program at the University of Waterloo. And if your video is selected, you may be asked to submit a script for closed captioning purposes. And if you advance to the next round of the competition, become a finalist, closed captioning will be required, as the winning videos are going to be uploaded to YouTube. So because as a finalist, if you are selected as such, will be made public. It's important that if you are using third-party content responsibly. So by submitting your video, you are agreeing that the submission does not infringe on any laws or third-party rights, and which should include things like copyright, patent, trademark, and a few other things there. Now, all of that can sound a little bit intimidating, that sort of list of different things that you have to be aware of. But don't worry, we have a number of different resources available for you, including what Lauren will discuss later in this session, that are going to make it very simple and make it very easy to make sure that you're following copyright considerations properly. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to look at the information through the links on the screen here. You can check out the competition information website on GRADflix from the GRADflix homepage. You can also review the understanding copyright considerations sections of this training session. You can access the Creating Copyright Conscious Videos PDF, which is linked here as well. And you can also contact Lauren Bile directly at the library, as her role is answering copyright questions in general. So with that understood, with the requirements laid out, let's look at some of the options you have. So what type of videos can you actually make for the GRADflix competition? This is something that Eugenia touched on a little bit that really helped her with just finding out what kind of options are available for you. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. You're only limited by your imagination, as corny as that sounds. However, these are 5 common styles of videos that you might want to consider. So even though you're not limited to these might spark some ideas and help you sort of imagine what your video could look like going forward. So the most common types of videos that we see are live action, screencast, animation, stop motion, and mixed media. And we've seen all of these in the GRADflix competition. Many winners have had a variety of different types of videos up here. So I'm going to briefly explain what each of these are and touch a little bit on some of the strengths and weaknesses of each format that you might want to be aware of. So first off, we have live action videos. This is probably the most common one, the one you're most familiar with. A live action video is a video that depicts a real person or real environment, and typically with a person talking or with some kind of voiceover that's overlaid over the video. So we're going to look at a brief example from a previous GRADflix video. Okay, so that's just a short example of a live action video. I just want to double check with my fellow panelists here. Was the audio working okay for that?
No, Graham.
No, okay. I think I don't need to, sorry about that. I will, there we go. Sorry, let's try that again.
Hey Hayden,
Here we go.
what's up?
Oh, hey, come here. I'm just researching how and in what ways German architects, citizens, and urban planners rebuilt the beautiful city of Munich.
Rebuilt?
Yeah, come check it out.
Okay, thanks for bearing with me through that little ditch there. But this is a quick and simple option for a video that is focused, that tends to be fairly focused and fairly relatable to your audience. So one of the reasons it's relatable is that it's by far the least time-consuming method and the one that requires the least technical expertise, arguably. And you can easily film this on a smartphone. You can cut together this video using editing software after the fact. You can film it in different pieces and merge it together. And it's a good method for getting your face, your voice, and your personality out there to the audience, right? So when I said relatable, it's a good way of engaging your audience because it's actually showing yourself on screen. You can show your passion, your excitement for your work. And it's a really good way of capturing audience attention that way. However, this style is not always as effective at conveying complex ideas or visualizing certain kinds of data or information. So for those kinds of things, you might need to mix in some kind of visuals or overlays or use a different format, especially if it's things like complex graphs or really complicated technical concepts that you're trying to convey. That's much harder to do just by describing it. It's much easier and more effective to have some kind of visual to associate with that. It's also worth noting that depending on the location you're filming in, you might need to deal with some kind of background noise or imperfect lighting, which are things we'll touch on later, but it's one small weakness of the live action format. Next up, we have the screencast. The screencast is a video that depicts a recording of a person's computer screen, usually with a voiceover. You might have seen some YouTubers or Twitch streamers using this format a lot in their content. So they'll have like a video game or something playing on, and then they'll have like themselves as a picture-in-picture, making sort of running commentary of it. It's a very popular genre in that respect. So let's look at a brief example here.
Players control avatars through a narrative, where they offer empathy to in-game characters to progress play as we measure engagement. This is the first study on whether gamification with narratives and avatars can encourage peer support for mental health.
So this is another very easy format to use. You can have a video or a game or a program operating on your computer, and then you can just record it. Kind of similar to how you would record or share your screen in an online webinar like this. It's a kind of a similar process. Although you'd use dedicated software for it. PowerPoint allows you to do this very easily, and we'll touch on that a bit more in a second. And this works best when you kind of have some kind of dynamic, ongoing visual action taking place, right? So in the example we saw, there was sort of movement and action, things going on the screen. And then there's sort of a commentary that sort of adds context or explains what's going on as it's happening. That's just, again, the similar reason why it's a very popular format among YouTubers or Twitch streamers. It's because it's an easy format and it provides an easy way of providing commentary or context to something that's going on visually. So it's a great way to illustrate your ideas as you're discussing them. And what's great about it is you can film it from the comfort of your desk, which is really cool. One of the downsides, though, is that sometimes it can be a little bit distracting for your audience, depending on how you set it up. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that if there's too much visual information on screen at once, it can be kind of distracting. Audience members might be focused on, in this case, like the video game that's happening in the background, more so than your actual words. So it's important to keep that in mind and make sure that when you're writing your script for these kinds of things, you're balancing it and making sure that it's complementing what's going on screen, and it's not sort of distracting from it or vice versa. So fourth, we're going to look at animation. Now, animation is a video that depicts animated or cartoon figures explaining or doing something, usually with some kind of voiceover. So let's look at an example of this, also from a previous GRADflix competition.
I will start by researching the effects of a children's magazine on speech and language development. Towards that aim, I will conduct a qualitative study involving interviews with children, teachers, and scholars. Finally, I will prepare a prototype by applying the findings I have obtained.
So this is, I think, a really fun medium that allows for a lot of flexibility and creativity. And Eugenia mentioned that she had a lot of fun with sort of exploring different aspects of animation. But also, as Eugenia mentioned, it's a very time-consuming process, right? So it does tend to require a bit more technical skill and a bit more time commitment in order to create an animated video. But there is some good trade-offs for that. So as a sort of recompense for that extra effort, you can depict some really elaborate concepts or scenarios that you wouldn't really be able to capture through the other formats that we've looked at. So for example, if in a live action video, you want to display sort of a classroom in session, that'd be kind of hard to organize. Whereas with an animated video, as we just saw, that's much easier to do. You can actually set up different scenarios and settings that it might be hard to access in person. So one thing to keep in mind if you are choosing this format is go into it with a clear script and a clear idea of what you want to do, because any revisions can take a lot more time and effort with animation. For example, it's much easier to reshoot a scene in live action than it is to reanimate a scene. So just keep that in mind, that this might require a bit more planning than other video types. So next we have stop motion. And stop motion is a video in which one frame is captured at a time with objects moved slightly between each shot. So have you ever seen sort of big claymation films or similar things like that? These are made using stop motion. Now let's look at another example from GRADflix.
Peatlands are a special type of wetland made up of layers of plant matter. Plants in peatlands take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in their tissues. When they die, the water stops them from decomposing and releasing that carbon. This keeps it out of the air where it would become carbon dioxide or methane, two of the greenhouse gases that cause global warming.
So you see, this is a very sort of simple version of how stop motion can be used, but really elegantly done. So it's just a drawing, a piece of paper, and then paper cutouts that are slowly moved from place to place with a picture being taken at each position and then pulled together to show that animation. So this can be a very distinct and visually engaging kind of presentation, right? It's a really great way of sort of creatively expressing your information or ideas that you want to sort of communicate to your audience. And it can also let you utilize your other artistic skills that you might have, right? So if you have the ability to do some drawings, it's a really good way of integrating it into your video. It can be very rewarding. It is important to keep in mind that, like the animation style, though, this can be very labor intensive. It can take a long time and a lot of shots to produce even a pretty short stop motion video. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Not that any of that should dissuade you from trying this out, but it's worth knowing in advance what some of the challenges might be. So finally, we have mixed media, and mixed media refers to any video that combines a variety of media types into one combined presentation. This can take a theoretically infinite number of forms, but it often involves combining elements from each of the different, not each of the different, but from different video types that we've already discussed. So for example, you could film part of your video in live action, but then cut to an animated visualization of a particular concept or data set. So mixed media is a very versatile approach, because you can basically pick and choose what are the best elements from different video styles that make the most sense in your video, right? So you say, okay, I'm getting to a part in my video where I'm explaining a complex idea. That's where I want this animation, right? And you don't have to do an animation for the whole video, just for that one idea or that one component you want to talk about. So the flip side of that is that because it involves multiple different components, it can be a little bit more difficult to integrate all these elements together smoothly. That can take a little bit more know-how or a little bit more planning. So make sure you're thinking through very carefully how all these different pieces are going to fit together if you're doing a multimedia or mixed media presentation. So now that we've seen these different video types, I want to briefly discuss, choosing the right video type for you. And actually, Eugenia already touched on this, right? She urged you to sort of consider what is the best video type for what you want to do. And that's sort of a thought process that she went through as she was designing her winning video there. And it's important to understand that there's no one best type of video, right? So you want to choose what's going to fit the content that you're trying to do, right? So you want to ask yourself, what are you trying to do with your video? What information are you trying to convey to your audience? And then what format is going to most easily allow you to do that, okay? You also want to ask yourself, what is feasible with your time and resources, right? So some video types, as we've mentioned, take a fair bit more time to create, or they might require some specialized resources. And these are important considerations. You don't want to sort of take on this huge task and then realize that it's going to feel overwhelming or add a lot of stress or anxiety to your life. You want to try to approach it in a way that is within your means at the time, both in terms of how much time you have to spend on this and what resources you have. And finally, I urge you to ask what excites or interests you about different video types or different video formats, right? Is there a format that has really sort of captured your imagination? Maybe you see those stop motion things and you're immediately thinking of something really interesting that you could do with that in order to communicate your research. Well, chances are, if you're excited about making a video using that particular format, it's likely that that enthusiasm and excitement is going to shine through in the video itself, right? Now, you have to balance this with other factors. You have to balance this with what is going to fit best with your content. You have to balance this with what's feasible for yourself. But it is a consideration, and you don't want to downplay the effect that your genuine interest and passion for something can have on the final product. So once you've decided what type of video you want to create, the next step is figuring out where to get started. So as Sarah mentioned earlier on, you don't need to have any prior experience with video creation in order to participate and even win GRADflix, right? So we're going to go over in this section some different tips that you have, different tools that are going to help you to get started and that are by and large fairly beginner friendly. So first of all, it's worth considering what kind of tools or skills that you already have that could be used for video creation, right? So you might think of yourself as not really having any skills or any relevant skills or any experience, but that might not be true. So the first question to ask is, do you have a smartphone? So if so, you've probably already taken videos or photos or audio recordings, and most smartphones can actually record pretty great quality videos on their own. The other thing to consider is, have you used PowerPoint? So as you Waterloo students, you likely have at some point, and PowerPoint presentations can be set up with animations and timing and exported as full videos. So that it can be a great tool, a very versatile tool, very versatile tool that many of us have already used without even thinking of it as a video creation tool. And finally, can you draw, sketch, or create graphics, right? So we saw in previous examples that some people integrated their existing skills with drawing to create their own images and incorporate that into their video. Now, these are just some examples, but it's important to not just write yourself off as having no experience, but consider what kind of existing skills you already have that you might be able to incorporate into your video, right? And no matter which of the 5 types of videos you're talking about. So when it comes to live action videos, one thing that might surprise you is that smartphones, they really do work for this purpose. They're easy to use, and they're actually quite a versatile video creation tool. As an example of this, we've got the Mobile Film Festival, which is a 1 mobile, 1 minute, 1 film program with lots of, it's been going since 2005 and has a lot of really amazing, just like 1 or so minute films that you can check out for inspiration if you want. Also, director Steven Soderbergh, you might know as director of the Ocean's 11 movie, has actually shot 2 feature-length films just using an iPhone 7 and 8 respectively, I think. Not Ocean's 11, but he did do 2 full-length feature films with just an iPhone. So it's a really actually surprisingly powerful tool, even if that's all you have to work with for the GRADflix competition. And in our very first year of GRADflix, our co-op student who had no video creation experience or editing experience filmed and edited a short 1 minute video basically entirely on her smartphone in less than 4 hours. So it's definitely possible for you to create something fantastic using just your phone. And whether you have an iPhone or an Android, there are also apps that you can get, which are listed on the screen here, which allow you to edit this video even right on your phone. However, no matter how you choose to actually capture the film, how you actually get your footage, there are a number of different editing options that you can look to. We've listed some of them on the screen here, where there's OpenShot Video Editor, Shotcut, or DaVinci Resolve 18, both of which are available for free on Mac and PC. And we definitely encourage you to check these out, because the actually getting the footage and filming things, even if you're doing a live video format, that's only the very beginning of the video creation process. In the editing sort of stage of it, you can basically collect, splice, split, crop, or reorder all kinds of different video clips or video or photos or audio clips, and to pull them together to create a cohesive whole. So what that allows you to do is allows you to create your video in smaller pieces that you can sort of make sure are really good in short segments, and then put things together through an editor. We also encourage you to, once you have sort of the footage nailed down, to layer on other elements that are going to add to the impact and clarity of your video. You can add filters, you can add text overlays to help explain things. You can add background music to add sort of to the ambience of your video. And you can also do things like adjusting color, speed, brightness, or even sound levels through editors after the fact. So there's a lot of different things you can do after you've actually finished the filming process with these different editing options. And we definitely encourage you to check these out and to look through them when you're working on your video. So for screencasting, there's a couple different software tools that we've linked here. The first being Screencast-O-Matic, and then PowerPoint, as we've mentioned. So both of these are available for you. Screencast-O-Matic is free. It has paid versions, but there's a free version as well. These allow you to capture your screen. So again, that's kind of similar to how you might share your screen in a Zoom meeting like this. But you can also set up to display yourself in kind of a picture-in-picture style format. And like with live action filming, you can either sort of narrate live or record audio separately, and you can also layer in effects or background music during the editing process. And just like for live action videos, we do encourage you, if you're doing the screencast option, to try to record things in short segments, because it's much easier to do that, to record in short segments and then put them together afterwards, than it is to try and get it 100% perfect in a single run. Like, there's a reason that the sort of one-take music videos are such a sort of interesting phenomenon and such a demanding challenge. It's because that's much harder to do. It's much easier to shoot things, whether for your screencast or live action, in short segments and then piece them together later. So for animation, it's a bit more difficult to find completely free animation tools because the process is a bit more technically demanding from a software perspective. But we listed 3 possible options here. Those are Animaker, Powtoon, and Beyond. So some of these have free versions that include a watermark on all videos you create. Or they also have paid versions that allow you to remove the watermark and access additional features. So watermark is not ideal, but if that's the only option you have available, these things do allow you to do that as well. And you can also do a free trial or a 1-month subscription as you're finishing up your video, if you are interested in doing so. If you're planning to work with animation, we recommend drafting a clear and detailed storyboard ahead of time so that you know exactly what you're doing and what you're looking to create using this software. So for stop motion, similar to the animation tools, there's a couple of different options here that have free versions. In the case of Animoto, the free version has branding on it, but there's also a $16 per month version of it that allows you to remove the watermarks and allows for HD downloads. And there's also Cloud Stop Motion, which is, again, free, but has somewhat limited storage for videos or photos that you're saving on the cloud there. But you can upgrade for more storage there. If you're just using it for GRADflix, you likely won't need that additional storage. So finally, for mixed media, the tool of choice for us, and the one we recommend for other people that are just starting out, is PowerPoint. So PowerPoint, despite how ubiquitous it is, it's a surprisingly robust tool for basic video creation. So it allows you to include text and images and multiple video and audio files within your presentation, and allows you to have movements and transitions. And basically what you can do is you can set up recorded timings and have these animations and autoplayed videos all happening automatically, and basically just record this as a video. And this also allows you to export it at the same time. So this has a natural benefit as well as kind of breaking down your video into distinct sections, more simply, because you can actually break it down by slides and things like that, which is more manageable from a scripting and editing perspective. It's sort of a built-in structure that allows you to build off of it much more easily. It also allows you to do some simple editing right in the program. So you can adjust volume levels, you can crop images, or videos, or trimming different file types, as well as adding background music or recording audio. You can do all that right in PowerPoint. You don't have to set up a separate editing software for that. And again, it also allows you to export as a full quality MP4 video. So it's kind of an all-in-one tool for this, at least for sort of basic editing requirements. So it's definitely something we recommend you at least try out to see if it's going to meet your needs. And then if you're looking for sort of some more complex editing options, then you can also look into some of the other options we've discussed earlier in the video for desktop editing. But you definitely want to check out PowerPoint as a starting point there. And just as an example of that, here's a GRADflix teaser video that was created entirely with PowerPoint. So you can see sort of what a final product can look like there. So it's a relatively simple example. As you can see, you can incorporate a lot of dynamic movements, auto-playing images and auto-playing videos rather, and music as well. So it's definitely a versatile tool that has a lot of different options that you can take advantage of there. So next, for this section, we're going to discuss, now that you have those kind of basic tools that you need to get started with the different video formats, we're going to talk about some basic tips and tricks for actually creating the video. So what are some considerations you might want to think about, and what are some sort of general tips that you can keep in mind when you're starting either the filming process or the editing process. So first of all, we're going to cover 3 general guidelines for you to consider while you're getting started. And these are plan ahead before filming, use images purposefully, and aim for authenticity. And I'll explain what these mean in just a second. But if you can keep these in mind as you start to create your video, it will be much easier to produce something that is high quality and it's engaging for your audience. So first of all, plan ahead before filming. So you want to consider who your audience is. You want to consider the what are the main takeaways they should have. What barriers or questions you anticipate from your audience. So for example, if you have a lot of technical jargon in your video, you might want to consider, well, what if someone doesn't understand what I'm saying by that, what I mean by that? And you can either decide to either clarify that or maybe take it out if it's not essential to the video. So once you've sort of thought about who your audience is, and in this case, the audience is a general academic audience, so they're not specialists in your fields. You want to determine what the best video format is. So do you need visuals or graphics? Do you want to convey excitement or enthusiasm? Do you want to have your face on screen, or do you want to sort of stay in the background and just have a voiceover, whatever option you want to do? And then you want to create a script or storyboard for your video. And we always recommend doing this. You can see the basic format of it there. And the goal of a script or a storyboard is to link up the different elements of your script with the visual elements that you're planning, right? So you want to make sure that everything lines up together properly and that it makes sense. Like you don't want to be talking about one idea whilst a different idea is being explained in visuals on screen, right? And we have seen this in the past where there's stuff that's kind of out of sync. And by the time they're showing a visual image of one thing, they're already talking about the next idea. And you want to make sure that you avoid that. You want to make sure that you're planning so that your text and visuals line up properly throughout your video. So you also want to make sure you're using images purposefully. So don't just think about what would look cool or interesting. That's fun to think about and it's important in its own way. But you also want to consider what your goals are for the video. What are the main takeaways that you want your audience to have, and what are the main barriers, again, here, right? So you thought about that in the planning stage, and this is another place where that comes up, right? So visuals can be used to add meaning or context or other information to your video, but you also have to ask yourself, what is each one contributing, rather than just looking cool. So it's fine if you have really cool images up there, but again, you want to make sure that it's going back to what I said in the previous slide there. It's linking back to what does your audience need to know? What are your main takeaways for this? How is this visual adding to those takeaways? How is it making my video clearer? How is it making it easier to follow for your audience? You also want to make sure that your visuals should complement the audio, not distract from it. So this gets back to, again, what I said about the scripting and making sure everything lines up properly. You don't want to have a mismatch between what your visuals are saying and what your audio is saying. You want to make sure that the content of the topic is consistent between the two. And you want to use images or graphics to clarify or illustrate complex ideas or terminology. Because if you're just describing those things, it's often very difficult for people to follow, especially in a short video if you're going through it very quickly. So you want to make sure that you have sort of accompanying images or elements that are going to help clarify things in your video. And finally, aim for authenticity. So focus on authenticity over perfection, right? So more natural language and pacing is going to help communicate your passion and ideas more clearly. So there's a tendency, because these are such short videos, to try to rush through, right? To try and cram as much information as possible into a short period of time. That's generally not going to have a good effect on your audience. It's going to make it harder for them to follow you, and it's going to make it less clear what your actual message is. So instead of expecting perfection, you want to sort of slow down, try to be more natural and authentic. And also, as we mentioned before, try to shoot your video in different sections. Don't try to force yourself to do it perfectly all the way through in that 60-second frame, but rather, do multiple takes, take the best aspects from each one, the times when you seem the most natural and relaxed, the times when you feel like the pacing is best, get a bunch of different takes and then, piece those together with editing after the fact. And that's going to, ultimately create a video that is much more interesting and engaging for your audience. And related to that, make sure you're recording more than you need. You want to experiment with different sort of ideas or styles and then trim down or discard as needed. You don't want to sort of say, okay, I've recorded it. That's all I need to do. I'm done. Now I'm going to go editing, because you might realize later on that, oh, actually, I need to add this or I need to remove this. So you want to make sure you have extra footage available that you might be able to use if you need to. So some important sort of filming considerations, whether you're narrating in your video or whether you're sort of filming live action, you want to think carefully about audio quality, camera stability, and lighting, because these are the foundations of high quality film. Everything else sort of is built up from these aspects when it comes to live filming. So when it comes to audio quality, you want to keep in mind two major considerations. First, consider your position relative to whatever device is capturing your audio. So for a computer, that would be your microphone, right? So the farther you are away, the poorer the sound quality will be. That's one of the reasons I have this headset, this bulky little headset here with the microphone right close to my mouth, just because it provides a higher quality audio than if I'm speaking to the microphone on my computer, especially if I'm at a bit of a distance to it. So some ways to address this as well are recording a voiceover separately on your computer, and then you can be very close to your microphone, and then you can overlay that over to a live action video. If you want to be in front of the video if you want to be in front of the camera in a live video, other options are using a lapel mic or a shotgun mic to help capture clearer audio than if you're just sort of standing at a distance from your computer or from your camera. You also want to have a measure of control over your environment during recording. So you want to try to minimize ambient noises or white noises in the area. So things like space heaters or appliances, they might not sound particularly loud to you, but that background noise can have a fairly big impact on the overall quality of your sound, and it can distract from what you're trying to say. So for example, I often have to consider whether my dog is going to start barking during the middle of a video or something like that. Thankfully, that has not happened in this webinar yet, but that's something you want to consider in your environment and make sure that that's not going to interrupt you mid-sentence or halfway through the process. You also want to try to avoid recording outdoors whenever possible, but if you do have some shots that need to take place outdoors, try to make sure that you're sort of protected from the wind, because again, it may not sound very loud to you, but a relatively small amount of wind passing over a microphone can have a very significant distortion effect on the audio quality. So that's something to be aware of going forward. Camera stability is also an important factor, because shaky or choppy footage tends to be harder to watch and kind of makes the video look poorer quality. So when possible, try to keep the shots stationary or use some kind of stabilizer for shots that require movement. So you can use a tripod for this or stabilizers. You can set a camera down on a solid object if it's a still shot, or for moving shots, you want to try to keep it for fairly slow, simple movements to avoid that kind of shakiness that comes from faster, more elaborate movements. But you can also stabilize the video to some degree after it's been recorded. So there is editing software that's available that has stabilization options nowadays. And that can help smooth out kind of choppy footage, but only to an extent, right? That's not going to help you if you're sort of waving your camera all over the place while you're filming, but it can help sort of smoothing that a little bit in post-production. You can also consider using alternatives like panning photos instead of live video to ensure sort of consistently smooth shots. Finally, whenever you're filming, it's important to think about the lighting, as this will have a huge effect on the final appearance of your footage. So you want to shoot in a brightly lit area whenever possible, because this helps avoid kind of grainy or low quality images. You also want to ensure that the subject of the video, whether that's you or something else you're filming, is not backlit by a light source such as the window or the sunlight, because that can leave them in shadow. I have a few relatives who refuse to learn this lesson, and every time I'm talking to them on Zoom, they look like they're in witness protection because their entire face is just blanked out essentially. They're just in shadow, so I can't really see any of their features. So keep that in mind, that you want light to be positioned in front of you, ideally at sort of 45-degree angles in 2 different points. And it should be sort of stable and steady lighting. You can use desk lamps or floor lamps for this. Ideally, you want to use shades across them to avoid sort of hot spots or glares on you. And you also want to keep them at a relatively good distance to avoid glare. So you can sort of experiment and position them to see what gets the best shot. So, and keeping in mind that, as I've mentioned before, filming is only the first step of the process. So editing is equally important. And here's just a few general tips for things that you can keep in mind to make sure that when you're editing, you're setting yourself up for success. So keep in mind that audio can be adjusted after the fact. So you don't need to have the perfect audio at the time of recording. You can actually, if like, for example, your video is a bit quiet, you can try to increase volume after recording with options like MP3 louder. Just a warning about this, though, that at some point, if you increase the volume too much from the original, it's going to reduce the sound quality. So it's not a complete substitute for making sure that you're close to your audio equipment during recording, but it can help out a little bit if you're finding that after you've recorded, things are just a bit too quiet. You can also, if you're using voiceover, you can actually add that over live footage and completely remove original sound or white noises to replace it with pre-recorded narration. That can be a really handy thing if you're just recording outdoors, but you're speaking off camera. It can be useful just to cut out the audio, the original audio entirely, and layer in your own narration that you've recorded separately. So that's another option that you have available to you. You can also do the opposite of that and add background music or sound effects to your recording. Just make sure you're not drowning out your existing narration when you do that. So with the live action style of video in particular, you may feel pressure to, as I mentioned, sort of go through that entire 60 seconds with a single perfect take. And that's really hard to do. So you generally want to avoid doing that. But what you can do instead is film in short segments and then piece them together through editing. So with editing, you can splice together the best sections from multiple takes. And in order to cover those kind of editing breaks, you can use transitions or overlays that are relevant to what's being said. So for example, if you're talking about a particular concept, you can have the voiceover going, and then when it's about to break, you can have sort of a graphic or image show up on screen related to that topic. And then by the time you fade out that image, you're on to the next section of video that you've recorded. Another thing to keep in mind is you want to be able to save all the footage you're getting. So even if you dislike a particular take as a whole, there might be useful parts of it, right? So save draft versions that you've done, because you never know when you're going to find something useful in them. And finally, when you're finished with the editing process, that's when it comes time to export your video. So when you're exporting, make sure your video is still meeting the GRADflix guidelines. You want to choose a high quality export. This isn't absolutely essential for the video requirements, but the judging criteria includes a section on video quality. So keep that in mind when you're exporting. You also want to export or convert it to an MP4 format because it's the only format that we accept files. So make sure you're doing that when you're submitting. And finally, double check after the exporting process, right? So you've created your video, you've edited it, you have that saved file, it looks perfect. Then you export it, check it again after exporting it, just to make sure, A, that the overall time is still 60 seconds or less. Again, that timestamp has to be 60 seconds or less. And also check for artifacts or glitches in the final version. It's rare and it shouldn't happen. It might just be because technology hates me, but I have had situations where I've got sort of audio glitches after exporting a video where they didn't exist in the original version that I was sort of exporting from. So you don't want judges to be the ones spotting those things for you. So just make sure you're double checking after you're exporting as well. Okay, so my time is just about up here. So I'm going to leave you with a few pages here of additional tools and resources that you can scan through. The PDF versions of this slides are available in the OneDrive folder, so you can check those out for these links. But here are some different examples of resources you can access. There's free tutorials through LinkedIn Learning. There is the PowerPoint free Office 365 accounts as you get as Waterloo students. There's also tools to create your own graphics or animation like Canva or Adobe Spark, and open license content that you can use to find sort of royalty-free videos or music or images that you can add to your video without having to worry too much about copyright issues. There's also equipment loans that GSPA offers. We have four pieces of equipment that we loan out on a short-term basis. More information can be found on the GRADflix webpage. But basically, we have a shotgun mic and lapel mic that you can use, as well as a couple of small tripods and a gimbal, which is sort of a handheld electronic stabilizer that helps you get those smooth shots if you're using a cell phone for your video. Also, there's 3 types of ongoing support as part of GRADflix. So the Writing Communication Center is open for appointments at any time, and you can contact with them and find available slots to book appointments related to research communication. Many of their people there are experts in how to communicate your research effectively, and they can sort of talk you through how to draft your script or how to condense the information you're trying to convey. We also have upcoming GRADflix drop-in sessions that you'll receive follow-up emails about, and the dates for which you can find on our website. And you can always contact GradVenture directly if you have any specific questions about the competition. Okay, you can also watch GRADflix examples through the playlist on YouTube's or the GRADflix Hall of Fame to sort of look at other examples and consider what aspects of that you want to emulate, what aspects didn't really work for you, and sort of use that as inspiration to refine your own video. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Elise, and they will give the next section on communicating your research in a 1-minute video. So I will stop sharing now.
Okay. Awesome. Let me share my screen here and then come. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm not going to share my sound. It's just not going to work with sound. It's fine. Sorry, I had to reinstall Zoom this morning, and so all of my settings are wrong. All right. Hi, I'm Elise. I'm from the Writing and Communication Center, and I'm the multimodal and public scholarship specialist. So I'm going to give you a kind of overview of some of the. I'm in the wrong place. There we go. There we go. So sorry, folks. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the things that you should be thinking about as you are planning your GRADflix video in order to communicate your research in a way that is sort of engaging and persuasive to the audience that you're actually speaking to. And so we're going to talk about your audience and purpose. We're going to talk about some different storytelling strategies, and then we're going to talk about some of the sort of decision points that you're going to reach when you're doing what we call multimodal communication. So the first thing I want to talk about is your audience and purpose. And this can seem really basic, but it's essential to crafting a good GRADflix video but it's also essential for crafting like any kind of communication. It's just important to spend time actually thinking about this. So my recommendation is that your first step really needs to be reflecting on your audience and identifying your purpose. So we know broadly who's in your audience, right? The GSPA has already told us that the audience is academic, non-specialist, smart scholars from a whole bunch of different disciplines, right? People on campus who think and care about research. So you can guess that the people in your audience have an understanding of the research process, or sort of are likely to believe that research as a process is important to do, right? But they may not have that sort of specialist knowledge about your discipline, and they may not have an awareness of the conversations that are going on in your discipline or in your field or in your lab or in your dissertation or in your thesis. So it's really important to spend a few minutes, honestly, just reflecting on who's in your audience, particularly to identify points of commonality and points of distinction. And so what I mean by that is you want to know how you can relate to your audience and relate your ideas to your audience. So think about the things that you share in common. Maybe it's values about what counts as useful research, or maybe it's, a common feeling of what it's like to be on this campus. Maybe there is a common reference that you can use to bring people on board. Everyone at Waterloo's probably had some kind of goose related incident. And so that might be a way to let people in your audience know that you share something in common with them. But it could also be something more specific, right? Maybe there's something happening in the world that your audience is also likely to be thinking about, or some kind of concern or hope or whatever. So spend some time really just brainstorming. What does my audience know? What do they care about? What are things that I can sort of rely on? And the other side to that is, what does my audience not know? And also, what are the things that my audience is likely to have trouble believing, either because it's difficult or maybe because they maybe don't want to believe the thing that you're saying. And so although that might be a little worrisome, it's really helpful and important to identify those places where your audience might not already be on your side, or they might not already believe what you're trying to say. So spend some time reflecting on who is in your audience, making informed guesses, right? Talk to other people if you're not sure. Your audience is basically anyone you would find on campus. So talk to people on campus. The second step is to think about what your goal for the video is beyond simply, I want to win, which is a good goal, an admirable goal, but not necessarily sufficient for helping you plan your video. So think about what it is you want your video to do for your audience, right? Now that you know who your audience is, you can think about these are the kinds of actions that my audience is likely to take in this situation. And I would like to change their mind. I'd like to convince them to do something else. I have a sense that my audience feels this way about a topic, and I would like to encourage them to think in a different manner, right? Or I know they think this is boring. I want them to understand how exciting it is, right? Or I want them to have hope for what a future with my new material could look like. So try to identify what it is you want the audience to get out of your video. I want them to be inspired. I want them to be excited. I want them to be curious. I want them to feel something. And that statement is really going to shape a lot of the choices that you make, right? If you want them to be, excited and have a sense of fun, then some more playful video styles are probably going to be way more appropriate than like a talking head, very serious PowerPoint style video. But maybe your goal is to, lay out a clear change in process for something. You want to convince people that they should do something differently, in which case maybe a more formal PowerPoint talking head video makes more sense. So understanding what you want the video to accomplish is really important. And then the last thing that I would encourage you to reflect on before you start planning what kind of video you want to make is what the core message of your video is going to be. And so this is difficult, right? Because you're condensing something that is a thesis or a dissertation into a single minute. That's a lot of information in not a lot of time. And what that means is you're going to have to let go of some things, right? So Eugenia mentioned really simplifying, right? And that doesn't mean trivializing your research. It doesn't mean making it seem less important or less complex than it really is, but it means focusing in on or zooming in on the core idea, the thing that is truly important. And so a scholar, Booth, has identified some useful prompts to help you go from like a broad topic to a couple of specific statements that will help you identify that core message. And my recommendation is that you brainstorm with these prompts. So you don't just answer it once, but you answer it 3, 4, 5, 10 times to see what kind of messages you can identify. So, you start by saying broadly what you're working on, right? I'm working on studying some sort of specific topic, some specific concept, because I want to find something out, right? As a researcher, I'm curious about something. I want an answer. I want a better question. I want a new tool. I want something. And then the next step is to really identify how that is going to influence your audience. Is it going to help them understand why something is happening? Is it going to help them understand how they can be involved in this situation? Is it going to help them understand how they might apply that idea in a different situation? And identifying both what you want to find out in your research and how it will help your audience understand or clarify something is going to get you to a point where you can actually communicate the importance of your research to another person. And that brings us to the sort of second part of communicating your research in a minute, which is actually putting it together in a story. So by story, we obviously don't mean fictional story. We just mean an organization of ideas and messages that fit together to express some kind of complete picture, right? So it's not the whole picture of your research. It is not all of the details. It is not every single complexity. It is the thing that best illustrates the goal of your research, or it is the person or the idea that is most useful to help someone else understand what's going on. And so when you're trying to communicate your research outside of a sort of traditional academic context, the process of honing in on really figuring out what is that core central idea is essential to storytelling. So I'm going to tell you a couple of different structures that you can use to tell a research story. But the caveat is, just like with the different kinds of video styles that you can use, there's no one right answer, and this is not a complete list, right? There are infinite ways to put ideas together. And for me, the most important message is you have to be thinking about how your ideas fit together and making choices about what comes first, what comes second, what comes last. And as long as you're making choices about what order your ideas are in and how they connect to each other, you're doing the right thing. However, there are some structures that are common and likely to be effective. So a really common one for telling a research story is the traditional narrative structure. And so this is really common in sort of Western literature. You'll see it in North American movies, and you'll see it in English, like fairy tales. It's the traditional once upon a time there was a group of people, then something happened to them, and there was some kind of momentous occasion where something important changed. And in the end, they returned happily ever after, right? So a rising action where something is affecting your main character, some kind of climactic moment where perhaps your research can intervene in a big scary problem, or your research identifies the big scary problem. And then the falling action and resolution where we kind of take a step back from that, moment where the hero fights the villain to say, here's what happened next, or here's what could happen next. So this is a really common structure, especially for English speakers. It's really persuasive, especially at getting people to feel emotionally invested in the topic that you're discussing. So it's a great way to get people to care very quickly about your research. And so especially if your research is about real people or is going to affect real people, a narrative structure is going to be really effective. But that sort of classic narrative structure is not necessarily the only way you can tell a story, right? Lots of other cultures have different storytelling traditions that are just as effective at getting people's emotions involved. And so you might think about, maybe there's no climax, maybe there's no big fight between the hero and the villain, but instead there's just a twist. There's a moment in time where our perspective shifts. And because of that shift in perspective, we see the world differently. Right? That's a really common haiku structure. You might also think about sort of immersing people like emotionally and physically in a moment, focusing less on telling a complete story and more on just getting people to feel what it's like in the moment of an exciting research discovery, right? Get people really like physically involved. And then also some stories don't start at the beginning, right? Or they don't end at the end. Sometimes stories are just about bringing together a few different perspectives as people from different disciplines or people from different places come together in a moment. And in that meeting, we get to witness something interesting happening. So storytelling isn't just about having a satisfying beginning, middle, and end, although that can be very satisfying. Sometimes stories are really just about getting people to feel something. If your research is maybe less connected to emotions, maybe your goal is not to get people excited or curious about your project, you just want your audience to understand how your research is relevant to them. Right? And in that case, a classic elevator pitch structure may be really effective for you, right? The elevator pitch is all about hooking the audience's attention, getting them to relate to your research, to see how your research is connected to something that they care about, and then finally to show them how your research is actually going to impact their lives. And so you're still getting them to feel something, but that feeling is maybe more like curiosity or hope than maybe like happiness or anger or like excitement. And so the elevator pitch is really effective when you have something that is going to directly impact your audience. It is going to be most useful when you are doing something that is going to change something about the world for the people that you're speaking for. It's going to be less useful if what you're doing is maybe not relevant to a whole community of people. I apologize if you can hear a bunch of noise. I have a very angry kitten in my house right now. So the last thing that I want to say about structure is that you don't necessarily have to tell the whole story. And in fact, you cannot tell the whole story of your dissertation or your thesis. You only have a minute. And so you want to zoom in on the key concept that's important, but also you might want to zoom in on a portion of your research, right? Maybe there is a particular research question that is illustrative of the values of your entire research project. Or maybe there's a particular participant whose story is most exemplary of the concepts that you're dealing with. And so it is okay to make choices about including some things and not including others. Especially because you may not be done your research, right? You may not be done your research. Your research may not be one that ends with a concrete, clear answer, right? A lot of research is way more complicated, and we end up, rather than with answers, simply more questions. And so a useful structure for communicating research that hasn't finished, maybe hasn't started, or really is way more complex than a simple elevator pitch can communicate, creating a research space is a really useful structure. And so the WCC has a resource on creating a research space, which we call CARS. So if you Google creating a research space and WCC, it'll show up. It's in our online resources. But the heart of this structure is these 3 moves, where you sort of say, overall, here's something that we as researchers care about. This is a pretty broad statement that lets you then say, however, there's maybe a problem or a gap or a question we haven't asked, or a group of people we haven't asked, or a point of view we haven't considered. So here's how my research is going to deal with that problem. Here's what I plan to do. And this can be incredibly persuasive, especially when you're talking to other researchers who may not understand the specifics of your work, but understand the importance of doing work that exists within a scholarly conversation. So creating a research space is all about proving to your audience that your research fits into a larger scholarly community. And that's something that really appeals to other scholars, right? That is a value that we all tend to share. And the reason why I tell you all of these different structures is because it's very important to plan out how your story might fit in to these different structures, because otherwise you risk writing out more detail than you can contain in a minute. And sometimes people decide that the solution to that is to speak as quickly as they can and not take a breath and do 2 minutes of narration in 1 minute without pausing and breathing and squishing all of their stuff together and editing out the spaces between their words. And what that actually ends up doing is stressing your audience out. That is not fun. That is not interesting. That is not useful. So when you're actually speaking your video, whether you're the one narrating it or someone else, you're going to want to have space between your words. You're going to want to slow down and not fill every second of time with your words. And that means you have to be very particular about the words that you actually use. And so before you start thinking about how you're actually going to make your video, I encourage you to outline a couple of different structures. What would it be like if I tried putting it in a narrative structure? What would my elevator pitch look like? What would my create a research space look like? And test out different structures to see which ones best align with the message that you want to communicate. Because multimodal communication, which is the last thing I'm going to talk about, is very complex, right? Graham already mentioned and Eugenia already mentioned that some of these things take quite a long time to do. And that's because they include multiple modes of communication, right? You have text, you have audio, you have like spoken words, you have written words, you have movement, you have color, you have images. All of these things fit together in what we call multimodal communication. And every element of those communicates something on their own, and additionally communicate something in combination with the others. And so it's complex right? It takes quite a lot to do. And so the more planning and thinking you do ahead of time about what ideas are actually relevant, what ideas are maybe less relevant, it's going to make the amount of work that you have to do more manageable. So multimodal communication is really about the combination of multiple modes of communication. And Graham already mentioned that storyboarding is an important part of the drafting process for multimodal communication. You can use like slide sorter. I know some people do a lot of brainstorming in sort of PowerPoint slides, but I really encourage you to do this work by hand, physically. And the reason for that is it is better to sketch messily, like to do dirty, bad, not good sketches of lots of different ideas than to sort of get wrapped up in making things look good digitally. So when we're planning and brainstorming on a digital platform, sometimes we tend to sort of believe that we're making a final draft because it looks more polished more quickly. And so we forget that our goal is quick iteration and brainstorming, and we start to actually do drafting. And you don't want to do drafting when you're in the planning phase. You really want to do testing very quickly of lots of ideas. And so a pen and paper storyboard is going to let you test lots of ideas out without accidentally drafting your ideas. And so the last things I'm going to say, I have a few more slides, and they're really just focused on some important decisions or sort of thought points that you're going to have to do as you're making your video. And so one of them is how you're going to use visual text, so text on the screen. Aside from captions, which sort of really directly, word for word, replicate the audio narration, it's a good idea to reduce the amount of text you have on screen. You don't want to use text to add in extra information, right? Like, oh, I had to cut out 10 seconds because it was overtime, so I'm just going to put those words on the screen while I'm saying something else. That's not helpful. Instead, you want text on screen to be like really quickly readable by your audience. And it should be kind of snappy, right? I don't necessarily find keywords interesting as an audience member, but I might find a statement like melanoma is a huge problem in Australia. That's a quick idea that I can like stick in my brain without having to think about too hard. So text is really useful in multimodal communication for snappy callouts and quick captions. On a similar note, graphics, charts, graphs, bar graphs, Venn diagrams, data visualization, very powerful, very useful when you're describing your research, but you should be redesigning them for your GRADflix video. The charts that you might publish in a journal article where someone has, infinite time to pore over it, they can take all the time they want to really analyze it. They don't have that time in your GRADflix video. They have less than a minute to look at your charts. So I really recommend redesigning any figures that you're going to use to make the main message clear. Your audience is not going to analyze your data in a GRADflix video. They want to very quickly see the message, right? See the result that's actually interesting. And as Graham mentioned, it is an opportunity for you to use existing skills. And so I would encourage you to be creative, right? If you have an existing artistic skill, absolutely use it. But maybe you're not a super crafty person. Maybe you don't have time to knit a frog, which is great. I personally would love to see someone knit their data on a sweater. I think that would be really cool. but that takes a lot of time, right? You might then think about what are some media that you find engaging. So, make it look like a comic book, or make it feel like an action scene in a superhero movie, or make it feel like a trailer for a romantic comedy. Think about the things that you enjoy and you find interesting that are personally exciting or interesting to you, and bring those in. And that joy and fun is going to sort of get communicated. However, you don't have to have personal, creative, artistic talents to succeed in a GRADflix video, because luckily there's an entire internet of people who have those talents and lovingly share it with us. So it is important to think about copyright, and I'm not going to get into copyright, but what I have on screen, if you follow that bit.ly, is just a list of various places you can find images, illustrations, animations, sounds, etc., that have clear licensing guidelines. So I try to find things that are like Creative Commons or attribution, basically licensed, so you don't have to pay for them, but you may need to say where you got the image from. I've put together a list. It's not comprehensive, but there you can find illustrations that people have made, illustrations that you can edit. My personal favorite is like Wikimedia Commons and the Smithsonian database. Both of those have just like wild things, just things that you wouldn't imagine someone has taken the time to make art of or take a picture of. It's probably in there somewhere, which is cool, right? So you can check out those resources as well. In that list, I've also collected a number of stock photo and illustration databases that are focused on diverse representations. So there's some for illustrations and photographs of people with disabilities created by people with disabilities. So really respectful, thoughtful diversity in stock photo and video media. And if you are, trying to depict the actual world that we live in, it is important that your stock photos, your illustration choices reflect the actual diversity of the world. The caveat to that is, if the work you do really is not inclusive of a diverse group of people, don't make it seem like it is by choosing stock photos that represent a more diverse world. So for example, if you interviewed a whole bunch of scientists, but all of them were like white men, maybe don't put people of color of various genders in your video, right? That's inaccurate. Hopefully your research does accurately reflect the reality of the world. And in that case, do use some of those stock photo databases. The last two things that I will say about sort of multimodal choices you can make are about audio. So whether you are narrating or someone else is narrating, if you choose to have someone speak your script, be aware that the way they speak is going to affect the performance. So the pace, the volume, the tone, all of those things are going to make people feel like it's more serious or less serious, or more exciting or less exciting, or more reliable and trustworthy or less reliable and trustworthy. So pay attention to the vocal delivery choices that people are making. And then also be aware that that's going to affect your timing. To say a script without a vocal delivery is going to be a lot faster than actually performing your script, because performing your script is going to include pauses. It's going to speed up some portions and slow other portions down. So when you're thinking about timing, time it out loud with a performance rather than just sort of reading it in your head. However, you may not include an audio narration, right? It's not required. It's helpful, right? We expect people to tell us things in videos, but you may want to use other sounds, right? Like ambient noise or music or various other sound effects that will help sort of make an idea clear. And again, there's no right or wrong choice when it comes to sound. It's really just about what is going to support your message. So for example, on screen, we have this like beautiful, serene picture of geese flying over a sunset. It's very calming, and it might feel strange if I chose to play the sound of a traffic jam, right? That might feel like it's the wrong choice because the sound doesn't match the image. But maybe my research is about urban sprawl, right? Maybe my research is about how, designing these 12-lane highways seriously impacts rural ecosystems. And in that case, that juxtaposition of traffic noises over the image of something we might expect to be serene is going to help me make my point. So that concept is true for every multimodal choice that you're going to make. There is no right or wrong way to combine movement and sound and visuals and color and shapes and all of that together. The only right or wrong choice is, does it clarify my message or does it confuse my message? Ah, sorry, the sound happened and it was very distracting. So I lied. I had one more extra slide that I forgot about. You may want to include other languages. Now, GRADflix is an English competition at this point, so the video itself has to be in English, but maybe you have a participant who speaks in a different language, or you have a section, a portion of your evidence that is most effectively communicated in another language. And you can use text overlay to help your audience understand what's happening, or you could even, provide the translation yourself orally. Yes, it's fine. The overall point that I want to make here is that multimodal communication is complex, but it is a lot of fun and can be very creatively challenging and interesting. And so I really encourage you, as Eugenia explained, to take this as an opportunity to learn a new skill, and in my opinion, to try something different. Take a risk with GRADflix, right? It's a 1-minute video. It's an opportunity for you to test out a new way of thinking about your research, to test out a new skill, or to come back to an old skill that you set aside ages ago. For me, the most interesting GRADflix videos are the ones that take a creative risk. So sometimes people fall back on, using highly produced stock videos and then putting their script over top, which is, that's a totally common genre of internet video. It's the kind of thing you might see scrolling on Facebook, if you scrolled on Facebook anymore, but you might see even on TikTok, right, or YouTube Shorts. Highly produced video with audio narration can feel like it's of a high technical quality. But remember that communication is the biggest part of the judging criteria, and it doesn't need to be the shiniest video. For me, what's most interesting is someone who has thought about the story that they want to tell and the tools they want to use to put that story together in a way that is going to interest an audience of other researchers. And so think about who's in your audience, think about the story you want to tell them, and make intentional choices about the multiple modes of communication that are available to you. And the Writing and Communication Center will be at the drop-ins, so we will happily talk to you about that. But we also encourage you to book appointments. We have appointments available that you can book with our staff members who will just love to work with you on your GRADflix video. We don't often get to do creative stuff like that. Lots of people bring in papers, which we also love to help with. But working on a GRADflix video is a real treat. So you'll definitely get a lot of excited help from a researcher who is not necessarily an expert in your field. So in other words, the exact audience you're trying to reach. And that's what I have to say about that. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Elise. So we'll turn it over to Lauren now, and for the copyright considerations portion.
Hey everybody, I'm just going to share my screen here. Go. Let me know if anything's going wrong with that. Otherwise, I'll get started.
It looks good.
Okay, thanks, Graham. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about copyright. I am the copyright and licensing librarian. I'm in the library. You can come see me in Dana Porter or talk to me online at copyright@uwaterloo.ca. Basically, just to make sure we're on the same page, we're going to just start out with a couple bits of copyright basics, and then we'll talk about some of the considerations when you're doing something in more of a public forum like GRADflix. So copyright is basically the right to produce a work, reproduce a work, or publish a work, or a substantial part of it. So when we're thinking about making these videos, we're thinking about what are the things that you're using that are copyright protected, that other people have created, that you want to produce, reproduce, or publish a substantial part of them. So this is likely going to be photos or videos from other people. It may be photos or images or tables from journal articles that you've read. And it also, of course, may include a lot of your own content. The content that you create here at the University of Waterloo for research and teaching purposes. So this would include anything that you're working on for your dissertation. Anything you create is owned by you in terms of copyright at the university. So you don't have to worry about clearing or permissions or chatting with anybody else if you can use your own stuff. So really, we're talking about using other people's stuff. So we're going to talk about when you don't need permission, because I think for the most part, a lot of you are doing this as something additional on top of all of the amazing, very time-consuming work of doing your graduate degree. So you want to probably find things that you can use without having to do a lot of extra legwork. Elise had a great suggestion of using Creative Commons or other openly licensed content, and we'll talk about that a bit later. That's number 3. But also we'll talk about content that just simply doesn't require permission, like things that are facts or ideas or works that are in the public domain. So facts and ideas aren't copyright protected at all. And this is just generally to contribute to the progress of society. If somebody owned the concept of 2 + 2 is 4, or owned, specific facts, then we wouldn't get very far, because you'd need to ask permission or use a Copyright Act exception to use those concepts, and we'd be in a bit of a sticky position. But this also includes things that would be in, say, a news report. So if you're reporting on fact, say, if you're reporting on something that happened, a collision, a car collision, and you said the driver of the car was wearing a blue shirt, that's a fact. Combining a bunch of facts together creates a collection of materials that might have copyright protection. So a news reporter could write an article that was entirely factual about that collision, and that combination of facts together would be copyright protected. But the individual facts on their own are not copyright protected. So if you're working with something in your field that is an established truth or fact, that element may not be copyright protected. So there's a lot of things like this that you might come across, especially when we're in higher level learning, where it's not entirely clear if something is a definite fact or not, which is where we get into ideas. And I find it easier in academia to think about ideas as theories, or sort of concepts that we're thinking about as we're doing our work. So no one owns an idea. The ownership in terms of copyright comes when something is in fixed form. So if somebody has written something down, if someone has created a sculpture or a song that's been recorded, those things are copyright protected, but the idea behind them is not. So you can paraphrase, you can rework an idea into your own words, into your own concept, and obviously citing them in terms of academic conduct, you would do that, but without asking for copyright permission, because the idea itself is not copyright protected. In terms of a sort of easier way to think about this for more popular media, we like to think about sort of the common romance novel, the idea of someone of a different background falling in love with someone from a, that is from a, so like the Romeo and Juliet kind of a concept, two people from different backgrounds with families that hate each other, falling in love. That idea isn't owned by anyone. And so anybody can make a romance novel based on that concept. If you start using the exact same text, then you might be thinking about copyright protection, except for that Shakespeare is in the public domain, which is our next concept. So public domain is content where copyright has expired, no longer exists anymore. So the work is no longer protected. So we're generally, in this sense, thinking about things that are fairly old. In Canada, copyright protection lasts for the life of the author and 50 years after their death. The law is changing and might be changing by the end of this year, in which case it would be the life of the author plus 70 years. So keep that in mind as you're working. If something like this does change in the next little while, you'll see a note from the university about that. But for now, it's life of the author plus 50 years. So in this example here, A. Milne, the creator of Winnie the Pooh, died in 1956. So over 50 years have passed since their death. And Winnie the Pooh, in its original context that was published by A. Milne, is in the public domain. And what that means is you can use the Milne created drawings and text about Winnie the Pooh in any way you want without copyright permission. You can have Winnie the Pooh go on your own set of adventures if you really wanted to. You can make his shirt a different color and turn him upside down and make an entire comic book about Winnie the Pooh's detective agency or something ridiculous, because it's not protected anymore. And and that's part of the purpose of public domain, is to inspire creativity. But by and large, I find most people aren't using public domain content because unless you're doing research on particularly old things, there's not really a bevy of good public domain content that we're interacting with in an academic sphere. Lots of folks are focused on what's been researched on and published in a recent time period. So then the other great option is Creative Commons license work. So Creative Commons is a licensing schema that authors can use to communicate to users or readers or republishers what they would like done with their work, what other people can do with their work without asking permission. And these licenses are great because even in their most restrictive, they encourage sharing. And that's the intent, that's the spirit behind Creative Commons, is that an author or creator chooses a Creative Commons license with the intent of making sure that their work is able to be widely shared. That said, there are a number of varieties of different Creative Commons licenses. So on this slide here, you'll see on the far left is the copyright all rights reserved. So that's just your basic copyright symbol, and that's what applies to all works unless otherwise stated. So it's important for you to know that even if something doesn't have a copyright symbol, unless it says otherwise, it's copyright protected. And then we move into the most restrictive Creative Commons license, which is Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives. So if you see something that has this license, it means that you have to provide attribution to the creator. so a citation of some kind. You can't use that work for commercial purposes, which is a perfectly fine thing for your video in terms of, we're not selling our videos. The business of competing in a competition where you may or may not get an award is not a commercial use. And you can't use the content in a derivative format. So you can't take the content and adapt it into something else. This may become more problematic for video content. So I would recommend avoiding the no derivatives Creative Commons license for content that you want to use in your video. But anything from attribution, non-commercial share alike to CC 0, which is a version of the public domain where authors waive all of their rights to copyright, even in content before they've died, would be perfectly fine for using in your video. So you'll be looking for these kind of symbols on websites or on particular pieces of content. I can share in the chat after I'm done here a site that's been put together by the Center for Extended Learning of a bunch of different sources of Creative Commons and freely available content. And if you're having any trouble at any point with interpreting a particular Creative Commons license or whether or not something is copyright protected, you can always send a message to copyright@uwaterloo.ca and we'll give you a hand. The other thing you can consider for works that are copyright protected is making use of Copyright Act exceptions. So Copyright Act exceptions allow you to use works without permission for specific reasons. So in terms of this context, GRADflix, the Copyright Act exception I think is most helpful is the non-commercial user-generated content exception. It's often referred to as the YouTube exception or the mashup exception, because I think one of the things that legislators had in mind when this exception was added to the act was folks are putting a bunch of stuff together, using a bunch of copyright protected sources to make new content, and they need to be able to do this in order to participate in online life as it existed when the new act was put in place. So really, we're thinking about, those videos that exist on YouTube of, someone filming their cat sliding around to a particularly intense detective music going on in the background. So that the video of their cat is something that's owned by them. The music is owned by somebody else. And that mashup is what's allowed under the non-commercial user-generated content exception. So in terms of the law itself, so you can use works published or made available to the public, so something that's out there, copyright protected, as long as you use the third-party work for non-commercial purposes. So that for the purposes of this GRADflix competition, just fine. You mentioned the source, so you can either put the source in the caption of the video or at the end in a resources list. You use a legal version of the work, so you're not pirating material to make a use of a work. So if you've downloaded an illegal version of a song, you couldn't then use this Copyright Act exception to use it in your video. And that your use of the work doesn't have an adverse or negative effect on the third party. So this would be something like if you were making a video where you were, be swearing a lot and then having a brand symbol in the background. Some brands might not like to be associated with that. So you might have a negative effect on the third party work. This wouldn't necessarily include legitimate criticism. So say if in your academic work, you're dealing with the work of a company who is, for example, not being ecologically sound, or their practices may not be the best as revealed by your research, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from using some of their content in your mashup. It's just sort of a warning against things that might generally have an impact on the copyright owner's ability to make money off of their content. So you might want to be a bit careful with that, but it doesn't stop you from doing criticism. I want to make sure that you know that. One thing to note, this last bullet point here, is that no one has ever been sued and used this exception as a defense. So all we know about this exception is what's in the Copyright Act. Whereas with other Copyright Act exceptions, we've had a bunch of case law come out, so we can be more confident about how the Supreme Court or how courts in Canada would rule as to any one of these bullet points. With this one, we don't have that guidance, so all we have to go on is the text in the Act. I think, fortunately, in the Act, it's fairly clear what these rules are for you making use of this exception. So it's if you have any questions, reach out and we'll see if we can guide you along. That said, I'm not a lawyer. I can't provide legal advice. So just keep that in mind as well. The other thing to note about this is that YouTube and many other video sharing websites are hosted in the United States, which means that when YouTube is thinking, can we keep this video up or are we going to take it down because of a copyright complaint, they will base their decision on American law, not on Canadian law. The States has a very generous exception called fair use, and you can often make an argument on fair use when a YouTube challenge is posed. But American law also has a requirement for YouTube to take down content as soon as a complaint is made. So if you use a lot of third-party content without permission, especially in a negative way, you may find that your content is taken down because of YouTube's obligations under American law. And then last but not least, are you doing this right? If you're going through all of this and you have questions or you're confused or you think, why am I trying to even include third-party content? It's so hard. You can ask us, and you're not alone. People come to us with questions all the time. I do this on a daily basis where I'm like, am I sure? And then I have to reread things or go over things again. So definitely don't feel bad if it's not immediately obvious. That's what we're here for. We're here to help. Again, you can email us, copyright@uwaterloo.ca. And just this middle part is really about, don't try to, pull the wool over someone's eyes or be tricky about it. If you think you're going to squeeze something in through a loophole, it's probably not the best way to go about doing copyright determinations. So if you're in that situation where you think, oh, that might fit, I can try to squeeze it in, just ask us and we'll see if we can help you find another way. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks so much, Lauren. So, and thank you everyone for sticking with us through this training session. We are at time now. However, our panelists are able to stick around for a few minutes if there are any questions. So if you have any questions about any of the content that was delivered during this session, please post it in the Q&A now. And we'll take a few minutes to respond to any questions that you have. And if you don't have questions, feel free to stick around to see if there's others that have questions that might be relevant to you. So we'll give it a minute or two now to wait to see if people are going to post something. Oh, we've got one coming in already. Oh, thanks for everything. You're welcome, Shah. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it useful. And just a reminder to people while we are waiting to see if questions come in, the recording for this session will be made available on the GRADflix website under resources. We will send a follow-up email to attendees of this workshop to let you know when that is made available. It should be early next week at the latest, that it is up on the website. You can also still access the OneDrive folder with the PDF versions of these slides, as well as any links that we mentioned during the training session. And just while we're waiting, if Sarah would like to direct us with a couple of sample questions that we've had from previous GRADflix participants, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I know sometimes it takes a little while to actually type your question in. So I am aware of a couple of questions we've got several years in a row that I'll start out with. So the first one is if I'm doing voiceover in my video, do I have to be the one saying the video? Because I know lots of people don't necessarily like listening to recordings of themselves. I, for one, will avoid listening to the recording of this session because of that. Graham, I'm wondering if you can respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't need to be the one doing the voiceover yourself. If you are having someone else do that, you need to make sure that you are attributing them properly within your video. But otherwise, you can arrange for someone else, like a friend of yours or something like that, to do voiceover in your stead. That's not an issue.
Great, thanks, Graham.
I can certainly sympathize with the not wanting to listen to yourself on video mentality there.
Yeah, all right. So, and I know we often get a lot of questions around copyright. One thing that does get asked is if someone is citing things in their video, if they have a photo that needs to be cited, does the citation for the photo need to be in the video at the time that photo is shown, or can they do a single slide at the end that goes over all of the citations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I often recommend is that to the best of your ability, you include some sort of little tiny piece of information on the slide where the image appears, and then a resources or references sort of slide or piece at the end so that folks can connect the content in the piece in the video to the source at the end. Otherwise, it's sort of, okay, I see you have this list of sources, but what was that one at minute 2? But it's really, in terms of copyright, there's nothing in the Copyright Act that says thou shalt place citation within 2 millimeters of the photo. So it's a mix of academic courtesy and copyright requirement.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Okay, so that was great. Our sample questions gave us some time for other attendees to write in their questions. All right, so yeah, great question here. Did any previous participants working in theoretical physics or math have any of them become finalists? This person is saying they feel it's hard to motivate the audience in just 60 seconds if you're from one of these areas. So Elise, maybe I'll turn it to you first to talk about the kind of how do you talk to someone if you are in one of those really theoretical fields, and then Graham can speak to if we've had people in those fields before.
Awesome. Yeah, I can. So it's definitely tricky, right? When you're working with more theoretical, abstract ideas, there may not be a literal, relevant, thing in someone's daily life that they can understand about it. But I think there are two important things to remember. The first is that you are speaking to an audience of scholars, right? Whether or not they're in your field, they understand this idea that there is a research process, or that as a researcher, you get curious about something. So what you might do is, rather than trying to sort of teach them experimental physics or math, or theoretical physics or math, hone in on the thing that makes you curious about it, or the thing that makes you excited about it. And that brings me to the sort of second point, is that when you're working with ideas that are probably like super complex, super abstract, it's really important to take the time to think about what your goal for the video is, right? So if your goal was, I want to teach them all of these concepts, that's going to be really hard to do in 60 seconds, right? That's going to be pretty much impossible to do in 60 seconds. But if your goal is, hey, I want to convince this audience that they should care about this weird math question, then doing something like creating a research space or telling a story where you're like, hey, one of my favorite books is Flatland, which is actually about like 2D math and 3D math and sort of understanding how geometry fits together. And that's one of my favorite books, and I'm not a mathematician. So you can use different elements of your research to highlight a message that you want to communicate. So that's a bit of a non-answer, but also the best answer I can give. Remember that your audience is other researchers, and they understand what it means to care about something that the average person on the planet doesn't care about. So you're starting from that good point. And then the second thing is that your job is not to teach us math. Your job is to get us to understand why you care about math. And to me, that's fundamentally different and gives you a lot more room to play.
Great, thank you, Elise. I'll just also say that there are amazing specialists at the Writing and Communication Center. Graham mentioned that, and Elise both mentioned that you can book appointments with them. So if you are struggling to figure out how am I sharing this, is it coming across well, those resources are really valuable. So Graham, I'll let you respond to the first part of that question now.
Yeah, so I don't believe we've had a finalist in theoretical physics specifically. We have had many science students in different types of other fields participate. There's, given the sheer number of different departments and fields that you want to do, we won't have representation across all of them generally. But that just means that there's an opening to be the first one, right? So don't let that discourage you, and just take what the tips that Elise provided there to heart. Because there's definitely nothing sort of categorically about these types of fields that prevent participation. We have had various, again, related physics students in here, just not necessarily from theoretical physics or mathematics, but we have people from computer science, from different types of biology studies, as well as neuroscientists. So there's a lot of really complex fields that you might think might have similar challenges there, where people have participated and even won prizes in. So please don't let that be a barrier to entry there. And please feel free to reach out to us if we can, help ease that process in any way.
Yeah, thank you. I will also say that GRADflix is still a newer competition. We previously hosted a 3-minute thesis competition through Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs when we could have larger in-person events. And we did have, I remember in particular, we had someone in pure math who did really well in the finals for a 3-minute thesis, which also is a competition around explaining your research to a non-specialist audience. So it is 100% doable. You may just, like I said, want to take advantage of some of those resources to speak with someone about your specific research topic. All right, so we have one more question here, and then it looks like we will probably be able to wrap up. So this question is for Lauren, another copyright thing. Someone's wanting to double check if they can use parts of videos that would be already available on YouTube, as long as they're giving appropriate credit for those video snippets.
So this is a bit tricky, mainly because of the YouTube terms and conditions. So YouTube terms and conditions prohibits you from downloading content from the site. I know that there are a number of services online that allow you to do this, but the terms and conditions of YouTube don't actually allow for it. If the video is Creative Commons licensed on YouTube, sometimes there is a download option provided in YouTube, and you can make use of that. And in that case, you could use the video in accordance with the Creative Commons license. The other thing you could do, so if you wanted to take a screenshot of a frame of a YouTube video, that would be something that we would consider insubstantial use. So use not enough of the content to even meet the threshold for copyright protection. But it sounds like when you're talking about parts of videos, you're talking about clips, and that gets messy with the YouTube terms and conditions. So it's a little bit tricky there. So I know that can be kind of annoying, because there's not really any legal way to get at a number of those pieces of content, but hopefully you can find something else to sub in.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So that's it for the questions. So I'll turn it back to Graham for a wrap up then.
So thank you everyone for attending once again. We hope you found this session very useful and that it inspired you to participate in GRADflix if you hadn't already registered. Please do visit our website and register for GRADflix if you haven't already. That'll add you to our mailing list for the competition to get updates about the drop-in sessions that are coming up, where Elise and other specialists from the Writing Communication Center will be on hand to help you work through ideas or even give you feedback on stuff that you've already started working on for the video. For now, we will wrap up this session. In case you missed it before, there's a link to the OneDrive again in the chat, which will give you access to PDF slides for today's session. And the session will be recorded, well, it has been recorded and will be available online through our website as well. And Sarah has just put in for the chat as well the link to register to participate. So if there are no further questions, I will thank all of our fantastic panelists for presenting today and for sharing all about this valuable information, and wish you all the best of luck with participating in the GRADflix competition. Take care, everyone.